I've had a consistent frustration over the last few weeks, and it's been that we've identified very important problems, but miscalculated many of the solutions to those problems. We're 44th out of 50 states in per pupil funding, and yet instead of protesting in Sacramento, where 90% of our funding comes from, we're marching in LA. Employees of the district can't afford to live in LA, families can't either, and yet instead of talking about the city and county's responsibilities to its residents in terms of affordable housing, we're being told we need to allocate money we don't have. Class sizes are too large and students aren't getting the supports they need, but we're implementing across the board one-size-fits-all solutions that don't address underlying equity concerns. And we're blaming others for financial problems without getting our house in order. A house that has included more recently iPads and MISIS and a bureaucracy that grows and grows. And now we're addressing a resolution that mentions our financial problems, but doesn't address the elephants in the room, which are legacy costs, the district's bureaucracy, and the dire need to increase revenue. There are a lot of things that I'd like to see a moratorium on. And with all due respect to my colleagues, they're just not addressed in this resolution. I'd like to see a moratorium on the increase in housing prices so we can support employees and families, given that most of our enrollment decline and therefore loss in ADA is tied to the increase in the cost of housing and demographic trends, so you should all be having more children if you want to help LA Unified. I'd like us to see a moratorium on healthcare cost increases and a real push towards universal healthcare, including single-payer solutions, so that we have over $1 billion back to put into classrooms. I'd like us to see a moratorium on low-performing schools so that kids poor and of color don't find their zip codes outcome determinative. I'd like to see a moratorium on bad policy coming out of Sacramento so we don't end up with an ed code that's over 2,000 pages and inhibits our ability to innovate and serve children. And yet here we are back to a false dichotomy, us versus them choice, where in our inability to address the tough underlying politically challenging questions, where we'd have to confront the anti-tax community, the realtors, the healthcare lobby, the anti-housing lobby, the political establishment. This false dichotomy leaves us scapegoating parents who have exercised their right to choose a great school for their families, a right that wealthy parents have had for generations. And let's be clear, we're not talking about a moratorium on private schools, which enrolls 10% of the city's population. And we're not talking about limiting people's ability to buy homes in affluent neighborhoods or to go to magnet schools, many of which are explicitly creaming based on being gifted, and all of which serve lower populations of students with special needs and low-income students than either charters or traditional schools. Our charters cannot legally engage in such practices, and yet our magnet schools do. And if there are schools that are doing more, that's the conversation to be having. But instead, we're talking about telling families living in poverty that even if their local school is like the one where I began my teaching career, where only 4% of 8th graders were proficient in math, and the year before, the assistant principal was arrested for sexually assaulting a student, that they're out of luck because they don't have options that families like mine had. That is about the least progressive thing I can imagine. And I don't believe in unlimited charter growth. And if you don't believe that, consider since I've been here, not one new charter school has opened in Board District 4. Consider that we've insisted on district-required language that incorporates our modified consent decree for special education and our discipline policies. Consider that we've spent time working with charter and district leaders to smooth over co-locations and even relocated charters from campuses where tensions were particularly high. That we've passed an open data policy insisting that all schools are transparent with their achievement, financial data, and facilities. That we saw the state attorney general issue an opinion recently mandating that other districts follow LA Unified's practices of rigorous oversight and regulation for all of our schools, particularly our charter schools. That I've been an advocate for unified enrollment to ensure all parents have equal access to their options, and that I've told numerous legislators and will continue to tell them that they need to amend the ed code to give us flexibility to innovate and compete with charters on a more level playing field. They need to justify why the ed code that is applicable to the district schools should still remain applicable to us when charters are able to innovate and be more flexible. That's a conversation to be having. But I have been consistent in my belief that the best way to mitigate charter growth is to improve district schools so that parents choose us because we're best, not because they don't have other options. That is not a choice, that's a sentence. And if a parent doesn't send their kid to a school, if their parent doesn't send their kid to school, it's a crime. and yet we would mandate that parents send their kids to schools that many of us, if we're being honest, would not send our kids to. I do not make decisions about other people's children lightly. And I don't find this responsive to the calls we've heard for increased investment from the state. That should be our ask of Sacramento, not this. Nor do I find this responsive to the reason I ran for the board. Most children may not ever have the opportunities that I've been blessed to have, but while I am in a position to try to make that happen, I will. And I do know that that's where my colleagues are at too. And despite the negativity of the last few weeks, I do not impugn motives. And I hope no one will. This is offered in the spirit of trying to help this district, I realize that. I know that just as there are hundreds of thousands of kids in schools today, they will be there tomorrow, and we owe it to them to move past frustrations and divisions. And while I do not support this, I do support the desire for all of us to be effective and to move beyond today, and to realize that everyone here, that our fates are linked and intertwined, and the investment of our kids will take us there. And so we do need to come back as a board as soon as next week and talk about revenue strategies and how we can address the underlying issues and not continue to play us versus them games that really just absolve Sacramento of the responsibility to reverse 40 years of disinvestment. That's what this should be about. Our only ask of Sacramento with the union, with our charter, should be invest in our kids, because we know that if you do, they'll live up to that potential.